William Ruto, thank you very much for speaking to DW today. The African continent is becoming something of a sort of a diplomatic sort of battleground at the moment over attitudes to the great turbulence here in Europe at the moment, the Ukraine war. Now, Kenya has taken a very strong and very distinctive position on the Ukraine war, right in the early days in the UN Security Council, speaking out very clearly against Russia's invasion. Can you explain Kenya's position? Why has it been speaking out so strongly?
Because we are great believers and signatories to the UN Charter, which speaks directly to a rules-based globe, and ensuring that there is respect for countries and their boundaries. Any violation of the UN Charter by anybody in whatever manner is a threat to violation of the same elsewhere, everywhere in the world. Maybe it is Germany, today it is Russia and Ukraine. You never know who it is tomorrow if we allow this to go on. So our position has been, this can be resolved. We must be a rules-based globe. We must respect the UN Charter. That's the position of Kenya, and not just the position of Kenya, that's the position of the UN and any country that subscribes to the UN Charter. And as you say correctly, the world is realizing that Africa is an important destination, important because of what the future portends, This is the continent that has 30% of the world's natural resources. This is the continent that has the largest resources around renewable energy. We are talking about 70% of the population in Africa is below the age of 30. Creative, innovative, energetic. And so it's necessary for any part of the world to realize the importance of Africa and to tap into what Africa can bring to the table. This is not the continent of disease and poverty anymore. This is the continent that has a future. Yeah. And everybody, any reasonable leader anywhere in the world would want to know what Africa thinks and would want a partnership with the African continent.
Yeah, there is talk of a kind of a sort of drift between the West and the global South on this issue of Ukraine, with many countries within the global South, particularly quite large ones, so very much on the fence, not wanting to take quite as clear a stand as Kenya has. What do you say to those countries? What's your message to them?
Our position as a country is that they say a threat to peace anywhere is a threat to peace everywhere. Our position is that this is not about the North versus the South. It's between what is right and what is wrong. There are those who genuinely believe this war should be sorted out, like us, because trying to apportion blame is not the way to go. There are those who are saying this war is as a result of sanctions. And to their credit, yes, the sanctions are having a devastating effect on commodity prices, grain prices, fertilizer prices. On the flip side, there are those who are saying this is as a result of the war. Again, it is true. So, is it the war or is it sanctions? And from where I sit, it doesn't matter whether it is the war or the sanctions. We just need to stop it. Let's find the mechanism to put it to an end so that we can stop the victims of this war increasing. There are victims, real people, who cannot access food, who have challenges, real countries like Kenya, who we've had challenges with accessing fertilizer. We have challenges with accessing grain. We've had to rethink about our agriculture. How do we do things differently so that we avoid dependency on the global supply chain of these commodities.
And China has been sort of becoming more vocal on the war recently. It's come out with what it calls a position paper on peace. When you look at what they're saying and how close they are to Vladimir Putin, and we just saw Xi Jinping in Moscow, do you think that they are a kind of a credible player in trying to bring the war to an end?
I think China should do more than it's currently doing, from where I sit, because I think China is a big player in the economic space. So I believe from even a strategic point of view, China should be pushing for the end of this war, because we've all come from a devastating effect of the COVID pandemic, and beyond the borders of China, China has huge interests in many parts of the world, including Africa, where they have deployed resources, they have supported the building of infrastructure, they've deployed their capital, and I don't think this war is helping them in any way to recoup or recover from the investments they have made globally. So my expectation, we saw, I think last week, there was a meeting between the president of China and the president of Russia. We weren't told exactly what the discussion was, except for, them saying they will work together. But I want to believe that at the center of the conversation was, where is this war going? Because it's not good for Russia. I don't think so. It's not good for China. It's good for nobody. So hopefully we should be able to see more of what China can do to leverage on its, friendship with the Kremlin and with Russia on how to bring this war to an end.
And yet we've just seen Vladimir Putin saying that he wants to move nuclear weapons into Belarus. When you hear something like that, what do you think?
It's really unfortunate because the rest of us were expecting a de-escalation. But it looks like a de-escalation is not happening anytime soon. And the threat of nuclear deployment of nuclear in this whole space puts many lives, many people, and maybe the globe at risk, of a full-blown war that nobody knows who will be the next victim. And it speaks to the urgency of all players. And that's why, even this morning, part of the conversation I was having with President Schumacher of this great republic of Germany was exactly on where is this war going and what is it that nations, signatories of the UN Charter, can do. Kenya in its own way, Germany in a different way, can contribute. So it's a source of concern for nations, for leaders across the globe, that this war is not de-escalating. In fact, if anything, it's escalating. And I don't think we should continue to take this lightly. I think there is more that needs to be done so that we can stem the hazardous and possibly the existential threat of humanity that this war could possibly pose.
Let's just step back maybe from the war for a moment and the even bigger picture. I mean, there's been criticism of the West vis-a-vis its kind of appeals to the global South over this war, that it is requesting kind of support from the global South after not putting enough money into fighting climate change, not showing sufficient solidarity over providing vaccines during the pandemic, for instance. Does the West need to look at itself and think more about solidarity being a two-way street?
I would even take it further. We've had a raging war in DRC. We've had a raging war in Somalia. We have challenges in Ethiopia. We have issues in South Sudan. And we are all alone. Kenya, for example, we've had to put our resources, Kenyan resources, in deploying troops in DRC. We are currently hosting discussions to support the peace process in Ethiopia. We are working round the clock to see what we can do supporting training of public officials, administration officials, teachers for Somalia, using our own public resources. Part of the conversation I was having with the President of Germany today is the drawdown, the walk away, so to speak, of EU from the situation in Somalia, and the rest of it. So when it is our issues, it is our issues. When it is other people's issues, it's global issues.
This is the Mr. Jaishankar, the Indian foreign minister's quotation. Is that who you're quoting here? Yeah.
So I think we need to have a fair conversation. When you talk about climate change, we've said this many times that we are bearing the biggest brunt of climate change with loss of diversity, huge droughts. Kenya is experiencing 4 years of continuous drought, severe drought. We've lost 2.5 million heads of livestock. We have lost livelihoods. Yet the conversation around climate change is still sterile. We're having difficulty persuading the globe, especially the global north, on loss and damage. These are not phantom stories. Loss and damage is a reality. And while we respect that we need to play our role in what the war and to speak about the war in the middle of Europe between what's going on in Russia and Ukraine, surely we need to have a much more candid conversation about the effects of climate change, about debt that is crippling many countries in the global south because of the unfair, almost let me say deliberate, international financial system that is rigged against the global south, where we pay 50 times more interest to access development resources than our compatriots, because we are priced out of resources by risk. Everybody believes putting your resources in the global south is risky. So we end up paying inordinate. And that's the conversation we need to have. And hopefully we will be able to push this conversation to the center of global debate on how do we move into the future. We are facing, as humanity, not as the global south, we are facing as humanity an existential threat because of the effects of 400 years of exploiting fossil fuels recklessly. The African continent is coming with a solution, stopping financing fossil fuel exploration and exploitation. It's not a matter of when, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, because it has to stop. Otherwise, this globe is going to burn with all of us in there. Let me give you an example. We're discussing drought today in Kenya. The president of Germany was telling me about drought in Germany. So climate change has no boundaries. There is no climate change for the global south. There is no climate change for the global north. And those of us from the global south are saying, we are coming to the table with our assets. We have the largest resources of renewable energy. We have the largest natural resources. We have the largest, maybe 65% of the world's arable uncultivated land. We have the largest population, young, energetic, innovative. These are resources that we are coming to the table and saying we need to have a conversation about how do we access development financing? How do we access fair, consideration? How do we de-risk investments in these resources so that we can use renewable green energy to drive the development of the world going into the future? Not the development of Africa alone, not the development of the global south. Let me say this with absolute clarity. We are at a crossroads. Either we choose to continue the exploitation of fossil fuels and we accelerate ourselves to climate hell, or we finance the renewable green energy in the global south and save the world.
Now, you're here in Germany partly trying to drum up investment into Kenya. So tell us a little bit about your thinking on that. I mean, China has been a very important investor in Kenya and also in the wider region in recent years, pouring in money. Are you now trying to kind of diversify your sources of investment? Do you think that Kenya has become, for example, a bit too dependent on money coming in from China?
Well, we're here because we have a 60-year-old relationship with Germany. It's always been there, and we have developed our relationship, and it's been on a trajectory of growth, whether we are talking about investments in our geothermal resources, in the water, in health, and it has nothing to do with what we do with others. There are new opportunities for both German investors, German business people, and Kenyan opportunities also for Kenyans, Kenyan entrepreneurs, Kenyan business people to explore and to work together. We see an opportunity because we have some of the largest resources of renewable energy. Germany, on the other side, have the best technology. Combining these two opportunities from the renewable assets that we have and the German technology that exists here, with investment, we can create a win-win outcome. Not just on that, on education as well. There is need for synergy between curriculum in Kenyan technical training colleges with their German counterparts, because labor is becoming a very fluid resource. This country requires 250,000 people to work. Kenya can actually offer, because we can synergize the training, the skills, the competencies that can be made available to this country. We are looking at opportunities for sustainable agriculture. You may want to know that Kenya is actually a tech hub in the continent. We have some of the best creative, innovative human capital anywhere in the world. Again, there is opportunity there as we present Kenya as a destination and a hub for access to ACFTA, that's the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which comes with 1.4 billion people, an economy of $3.4 trillion, and the youngest population in the globe. A quarter of the world's population will be living in the African continent by 2050. So there is sufficient reason for Germany and Kenya to work together, because the opportunities available are tremendous.
Now, I'd like to turn to the situation in Kenya at the moment, because also connected with the war. There's a cost of living crisis being experienced in many, many countries. Kenya is pretty badly hit, and people are angry. There are big protests. Police have been firing tear gas today. What are you doing to calm the situation?
We live in a context, and Kenya, by the way, is possibly the largest democracy in our region. And we had the best ever election last year. Of course, unfortunately, 6 months after the election, my competitors, let me say, decided to pick up and say that to want to challenge the election, not in a court of law, not in any known jurisdiction, but to challenge my election on the streets with demonstrations. But let me tell you that from where I sit, yes, we have a crisis of commodity high prices, whether it's fertilizer, whether it is fuel, whether it's grain. You've asked me directly, what am I doing? Number one, we have registered 5 million farmers. We are providing fertilizers and seeds for them to grow. Number two, we are importing food from across the globe, where some of the imports arrived last week. We've cleared some of them to begin to tamper the price of commodities. We are also investing long-term on irrigation, and that's part of the conversation I will be having with German officials on how we can work together to change our agriculture from being rain-fed to being agriculture under irrigation. The riots in Nairobi are not so much about the cost of living. It is so much about some election results, which is actually a settled matter. But of course, because cost of living is a pregnant issue, is a emotive issue, our competitors are trying to take advantage of it. But I think the people of Kenya are a lot wiser.
I mean, your critics have said that you have so far not been able to deliver on your promises to lower prices, and you have been increasing taxation. This connects with discussions with the IMF. Do you feel that you're being squeezed by the IMF into raising these taxes, or do you stand by the tax increases?
There are no increases of any taxes that we have proposed that are punitive. The IMF has no role in how we run the affairs of our country. We are in charge of the economy. Many people would say what you're saying, but let me give you 3-4 things. Number one, we have stabilized the economy. The economy was on a slide into debt. Everybody appreciates that we have stabilized the economy. We couldn't access the international financial markets when I took over. Today, we can access any international market because they have seen the kind of stability we have brought. And
I'd just like to finish by touching on an issue that has been the source of some international controversy, the LGBT issue, which in East Africa, many East African countries, has been controversial. Just recently, the neighboring country of Uganda introduced very draconian legislation, which caused quite an outcry internationally. Do you have a feeling that Uganda has gone too far with its legislation?
I am Kenyan, so I'm sure Ugandans can speak for themselves. I can only tell you about Kenya and what Kenya as a country and me as a leader, we've taken the position that the provisions of the Constitution as it is today, the provisions of the law as it is today, we allow other countries to do what they want to do. We cannot dictate to Germans or Americans or French or Ugandans on what they want to do. That's theirs to choose. For us as a country, we have taken a position, and that position is informed by our culture, our tradition, our constitution, and our laws.
But those laws do date back to the colonial era in some cases. And, critics outside would say, well, LGBT rights are an intrinsic part of human rights, which are internationally recognized. Do you recognize that? Do you see that the rights of LGBT people are intrinsically a question of human rights, which are universal, or do you feel that it is simply something that it is for each country to decide?
The Kenyan Constitution is a 2010 constitution. In fact, it was celebrated as the most progressive constitution, providing especially the chapter on human rights and the rights of people and the extent of the protection of rights of people that is enshrined in the Constitution. And in that context, in the formulation of that Constitution, the people of Kenya spoke expressly as to what kind of rights and to what extent everybody can enjoy their rights without infringing on the rights of others. In Kenya, the only understanding of relationships around marriage is around men marrying women. That's the context of a relationship that exists in Kenya and exists in our constitution and is provided for in our constitution. And it can happen elsewhere. We have no issue with people celebrating their issues in America and in other countries. That is their choosing.
Just very briefly, I mean, it was really just a blink of an eye also in Europe, in the United States, that marriage was only between a man and a woman as well. It's a very short time. Do you think that will never come in Kenya, or you think maybe it will just come but in a longer period of time?
I cannot tell you. I cannot stretch my imagination that far. Maybe we can leave it here for now and see what happens in the future.
William Ruto, thank you very much for speaking to DW today.
Thank you very much, my brother.